This is an outside broadcast. As you can see, we are on the beach. There's the sea, there's some sea kale, which is an interesting botanical specimen that is the father of all of the brassicas. And then coming round here, how the devil are you, Kevin?
Well, I'm good. I'm very well. I'm doing the, as I just suggested, the archetypal fair-skinned person squinting into the sun type interview. But if we can get past that, I'm sure we'll get what we want.
Yeah, well, what's wrong with an ice cream on the beach, eh?
Yeah, it's what we call informal, isn't it?
Now, Kevin, you're my mate.
Indeed.
We've known each other a couple of years now, and we think alike. But your journey has been a very different path from mine.
We shall have a refugee or something.
No, just different.
Yeah.
My parents were not religious, so I retained my natural-born non-belief throughout life, and I became a science teacher. And you became a religious education teacher. How did that happen? Were you raised in a faith?
No. No, there's no faith really. I mean, if anything, there's a healthy amount of scepticism and mainly just people getting on with their lives and occasionally intersecting with the church in terms of the usual stuff like baptisms, not baptisms, it's christenings, isn't it?
Yes.
Christenings, weddings. I seem to remember a lot of the weddings being registry offices actually when I was younger.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I got some kind of pertinent religious related experiences insofar. When I say experiences, I'm not talking about some kind of awe related thing where I was spoken to. I mean, I remember wanting to play a musical instrument.
Yeah.
And the Boys Brigade seemed like a logical extension of that, and then of course I was informed that in order to do that it would be necessary to go to Sunday school, and so I gave up on the idea of music at that point because
Price too hard to pay.
well, also this scepticism that, I mean, my parents were in the habit of watching things like Dave Allen and therefore that sort of stood alongside the way they tend to view religion, really, that sort of thing, you know. And if you look at sitcoms back then as well, given that we'll probably talk about comedy at some point, when you look at the character of the vicar, they're always a buffoon. You know, think of Dad's Army or something, you know. So that tended to be how my parents viewed religion and the people therein. Also as well, I mean, it didn't stop them. Never stopped my mum sort of referring to God in the casual way that some people do, you know. But I didn't. There was no belief, and certainly no pressure to conform in that way. Oh, the religious studies. You asked me about that, didn't you? That was an accident. I was kind of, I suppose, at a crisis point. Needed to re-assimilate. The person I was seeing at the time encouraged me to go to university. I enrolled in Freshers Week. There were two choices: science, funnily enough, or religious studies. And I'd had a bad experience of science at sixth form level. I wasn't really up for it, and I'd been reading a lot of philosophy at that point. So it seemed like religious studies was the obvious choice.
Yeah. So you didn't have a faith to lose. You're a bit like me in that respect.
No, I mean, I didn't, and I was fairly carefree about it all until, obviously, after you've taught something like religious studies, you then have a greater insight, hopefully, and then you suddenly realise that, well, with particular regard to the subject I taught, that the way you tend to regard that in what you think is a fair way, a secular way, it's not the way it's regarded across the board. So I've become a little bit more engaged in that area of late, you know, and that's kind of the thrust of what I'm doing at the moment with regard to the show that I'm doing in Edinburgh.
Yeah, we'll talk about that shortly.
Absolutely,
Definitely.
absolutely.
Now, I've worked in a Catholic secondary school,
Sure.
and there was a couple of, I was in the science department, obviously, and there was a couple of devout science teachers. Yeah, I know that sounds like a contradiction, but there are. And some of them even attempted to finish their lesson with prayers. But that didn't go down well. The children rebelled and they soon gave it up.
That's interesting. I've been in Catholic schools as a supply teacher, and prayers were fairly sort of mandatory at the end of lessons or before break.
Yeah.
And most of the kids, obviously Catholics, some Muslims quite frequently as well, actually, because Muslim parents would rather their kids went to a faith school than not. And most of them just went along with it because it was the routine, I think. But yeah, to be in having done supply in Catholic schools here and there, not massively, but now and again, that struck me as something that's pretty much a given prayer at certain times of the day, other than morning assembly. I have seen plenty of that. Yeah.
But you were a secular RE teacher. How did that go down with your colleagues? Was it an odd thing? Or?
No, I mean, I was in a state school. It was a state school then. It may well be an academy now. I haven't quite checked, but it's. I think, particularly with particular regard to the way I was taught at university about, the subject, sort of from a humanities perspective, was it was pretty much what was regarded as the norm. I mean, I went in other schools and saw other religious studies teachers, and most of them, I think, taught in the same way.
Oh yeah.
You do get the odd one. I mean, obviously you get the ones in faith schools where it's a what to think rather than a how to think approach. But you do get the odd one who's teaching in the kind of humanities way that I was, who occasionally will say something like, and then Jesus said such and such, and they will say it in such a way that they make it sound like it was a given, it was a truth.
Yes.
Whereas my approach would be to say, and then Jesus, according to this, said that. You always frame it as a kind of this is according to Christian belief, not according to belief per se. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So you do see people doing that occasionally.
Well, I remember in the early days of teaching, I was at a boys' school. It wasn't a religious boys' school in any sense, but we used to have an assembly every morning, and on one occasion they invited the local vicar, and he came along and he talked about football. And the boys were glued. They were focused on him. They knew all the names and the scores and everything, and he really had them in the palm of his hand.
Yeah.
And then he said, "That reminds me of the story of Jesus," and an audible groan went through the hall.
That is also something observed by Billy Connolly primarily. But yes, if you ever sit in an assembly like that, the only way you can seemingly, and it's like listening to thought for the day as well, is by analogy.
Yes.
So what you do is you get a narrative here, a human narrative, something you can relate to, and then you go, I saw one like that. I was at these evangelicals used to come into a school I was working in, and they did a game with the kids called Who Wants to Be a Pound Heir. It was at the time of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Yes.
And of course all the kids wanted to win a quid.
Yes.
So they all engaged, it all got very exciting, and somebody won it, and then one of them went, "But what is real wealth?" And of course there it is.
Yes.
And there's your analogy.
Yes.
And away we go. Let's get stuck into something of a more biblical orientation. So there is no absolute. There might be an absolute as far as their thinking is concerned, or what a religious person believes, but there's no way of clarifying that in terms other than the language that is available. So you always tend to find analogy. So you get like you say, we'll talk about Tottenham Hotspur or whatever, and then we'll take the idea of a team, and there's 11 and a manager,
Yes.
you know, and there's somebody on the subs bench just to make it 12 if you want, just to make
Yes.
it, and then the next thing you know,
Oh, isn't it like the disciples?
of course, yeah, it's a bit of a, I think it's a bit of a cliche, but people seem to fall into it. Really, well, religious people fall into it. Every thought for the day, Chris Evans show or whatever,
Yes.
same
yes.
sort of thing.
Radio 4 still does mandatory, not Christian, but religious thought for the day.
Yeah.
There have been attempts by the Humanists UK to have occasional non-religious speakers in that slot.
I think that's.
And I think
yeah.
once we had Richard Dawkins, he did a thought for the day, but it's been stomped on.
Well, that seems to me that, you know, if you were to take a secular approach, in the interest of a level playing field, to have a non-faith orientated thought for the day, it doesn't make the thought or the whatever the thing under discussion is any less valid.
No.
You know, it doesn't have to have a religious basis for it to be. You know, there is this thing like we're going to talk about Christian values. Well, I think if you examine those values, they're probably pretty much in keeping with other religions.
Or no.
Or no religions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a tendency, isn't it, for religions to try and steal everything that has evolved. Humans don't, they cooperate. They don't go out and rape and pillage
Hopefully not.
if they haven't heard the word of God. In fact, if you go around the world, the anthropologists have visited all of the islands and so on, and whatever the local belief is, or even if they have none, they agree that they don't want murdering.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm not an anthropologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I think human beings are a social animal, and there's probably parallels in a lot of cultures whereby humans organise themselves that suggest these are the best methods or models in terms of survival, and then you get sort of more folk-orientated religions that go along with that, and some are more controlling than others, and some are just part and parcel of the culture, you know. But I don't think the religious thing or the idea of a creator, you know, sort of prefaces the idea of being able to be organised and have values that suit the community. You know,
It's theft.
it's a given thing. It's there. You know,
There are universal morals that everybody agrees, irrespective of their faith or none.
Yeah.
Now, I asked you about your colleagues in the schools, but what about the parents? Because of course, we have to face parents, don't we, on Parents' Day?
Yeah. I've got quite a bit in my show about this.
Have you?
Yeah,
How did
I
they
mean-
feel about having a secular RE teacher?
Most of the time, you're up against a large amount of indifference.
Yeah.
If I saw a thing one time that kind of ordered how both parents and children prioritise lessons in school. Things like, in certain schools, not all schools, religious studies and modern languages invariably come somewhere near the bottom. And so if I got parents on Parents' Evening, which I did, but say not as many as the English teacher would, which, you know, in some ways is a blessing if you want to slightly have a lighter workload or whatever. It was all very functional for the most of the time. Some were keen to know what my orientation was, and from both perspectives. Some of them wanted to know what my orientation was from the perspective of them having a faith, and others from the point of view of hopefully me not having a faith. So it's a bit of a rock and hard place. I mean, I taught in Crawley, which is a significant Muslim community and Hindu community, and you know, they're on the whole quite accepting that I didn't have a faith. I mean, it struck me that from the perspective of both the Muslim and the Hindu community, that as far as the teachings were concerned, they wouldn't care anyway, but in the context of the mosque, you know, so there wasn't too much, there was no difficulties there, you know. I mean, what you tend to get, funnily enough, you tend to get non-believers telling you what they think, thinking that you haven't thought about it yourself, you know.
Well, they expect you to come with a faith,
Yeah.
being an RE teacher.
Yeah.
That's a natural expectation.
Yeah.
Now, after I retired, I did some agency work, and of course sometimes I would be given an RE lesson to cover, and so I would check out the classrooms while I was in the lesson, and I discovered that there were lots of textbooks on the various sorts of religion, but pretty much nothing, maybe one page in those textbooks on non-belief.
Oh yes.
Is that your experience?
No, actually. I mean, in particular, I taught a module over the course of Year 9. There's a series of textbooks by a chap called Kirkwood, I think.
Yeah.
Looking for proof of God, looking for God. And they're very accessible, they're sort of animated, they're cartoon-like images. And they cover stuff like Thomas Aquinas' First Cause Argument, Paley's Watch, Ludwig Feuerbach was in there, Pascal's Wager, and they're great because, you know, the kids, which, you know, people aren't always aware, they've got the same questions adults have. They might not necessarily sort of frame them in the same language, but they've got the same life-orientated questions adults have. So this would be one module, in my experience, that invariably went very well because it catered for those questions. And it was very balanced. It also talked about, you know, non-belief versus belief, and it wasn't, the overall module was not designed to have any conversion aspect to it. It was just to lay out the arguments and say these are some of the traditional arguments for and against, and, you know, just leave it open to discussion.
Make up your own minds.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah.
You'd think that was a given, wouldn't you?
You would, yes.
Yeah.
It teach you how to think.
Not what to think.
Absolutely.
That's my little maxim at the
Yeah,
moment.
yeah, quite. Now the government here,
Yes.
they set up faith schools which have an assisted entrance, if you like, to particular religious pupils, which means that if it's a good school, all the parents try to get into the catchment area and buy up the houses.
That's right. Irrespective of faith.
Yes, yes, just to get in the good school.
Yeah.
They have to go along to their local church for a couple of times just to get their
Like when you get married.
authentication.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And now I understand that there was a move in government to try and drop the cap, because these schools have been limited. They can only have, I think it was 50% from the faith, and the other 50% of the school had to be Tom, Dick and Harry.
Yeah.
But people in government tried to remove the cap so that they could become effectively pure faith schools.
That's right.
Now, I don't see this as a good idea. I
I
suppose
think it's been altered recently.
it has.
Yeah.
Yes, there was campaigning again by Humanist UK.
And the National Secular Society.
Yes, them too. And they lobbied and persuaded the powers that be not to drop the cap. So it was announced, but in the same breath, the government announced that they were also going to open a new type of school, which wouldn't be in their academy system, but which would get state funding and would have no cap.
VA faith schools, yeah. Voluntary assisted, which means they
Yes.
can also petition the local. There's voluntary controlled and there's voluntary assisted, and the voluntary controlled ones tend to be slightly lighter on it, I think, and the voluntary assisted usually have a central body that pretty much determine the ethos of the school. I mean, I have to say, my kids are at a faith school. It wasn't our initial choice. We've ended up there. Obviously, they don't seem to have turned into Christians at all. It feels slightly contradictory. Sometimes you have to, keep your eye on things slightly, to be fair. But in principle, I'm not in favour of the idea at all.
No.
I think my overarching belief is that we should have a reasonably standardised approach to teaching RE in terms of a humanities subject, a how to think, not what to think approach, and then, you know, having a secular orientation and being pluralistic and tolerant. If you do want to learn about your faith, you know, there is Sunday school or whatever.
Yes,
you know.
yes.
You know.
There's mosques and temples and synagogues and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking anything oppressive here as far
No.
as faith groups are concerned.
No.
We're just talking about young minds and the idea that they should be able to be, at the very least, be aware that there is a choice.
Yes, and
You know.
make an informed decision.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, rather than have it, well, in some cases, horribly mutilated upon them in terms of their genitalia. I mean, let's face it,
Well, there is
these
that.
things
yeah.
go on.
That's. I mean, people will argue that's more of a cultural thing rather than a religious thing because it's a particular group within
Jewish?
a group. Isn't it? Well, there's that. Yeah, there's that, and there's also, I think, certain African Muslims, isn't there?
Yes, yes.
I mean, that's quite a current thing, and I think the argument, it's like not eating certain types of food.
Yes.
The argument resides in history, doesn't
Yes,
it?
yes.
Because at one time there was a ironically there was a evolutionary reason for it. You know, there was a survival orientated
Yes,
reason
yes.
for these things, which doesn't apply
Yes.
anymore.
Yes.
You know.
In the early days of mankind, it helped to be in a tribe,
Yeah.
but not anymore.
Not necessarily. I mean, people do tribes within tribes, and we've all got our little affiliations. But yeah, it comes back to the pluralistic thing as well. By all means, get on with whatever it is you're doing, as long as it's not harmful to others. You know?
Yes, absolutely.
You know.
Now, your new career. I've personally seen you in the stand-up role a couple of times,
Yeah.
and I've also seen you in the host role of, you know, a sort of chat show.
Yeah. I
How's
forget
it
that.
coming?
It's good. I mean, the thing you saw latterly with the Worthing Skeptics, are we allowed to give them a little shove?
Sure, why not?
That is.
Other brands are available.
Yeah. Well, the Skeptics in the Pub has been a wonderful setup for me insofar as I've been able to take this show, which was just a bunch of ideas, put them together and try and formulate it into an overall sort of narrative. I did it with the Worthing Skeptics, and I'd say quite a bit of it went well, and I was quite pleased with the response. And there isn't the pressure that there is in a certain comedy settings to have, you know, 2 or 3 punchlines a minute or whatever. Although I would like to have that, and it seems to be heading more and more in that direction. So the whole thing is kind of coming together insofar as I was a religious studies teacher. I attend my local humanist group. I've been connecting with the skeptics like yourself, which has been an excellent experience. More latterly, I've been kind of communicating with the National Secular Society with particular regard to. I went to a religious education conference recently. It was very informative, and of course all of this is filtering into the stand-up, and so I'm actually getting an idea that now has it's for my thing, you don't want to overstate it, for my way of thinking, it has the components that I'm looking for, the framework to actually put some of these ideas in the form of jokes, albeit, and you know, if you've seen it, then perhaps if I talk it up too much, but if you've seen it, and you know, hence we're sitting here because it must have met with some approval.
It's very good, folks.
Yeah, then I'm happy with that. I've got a bit to do. I'm going to Edinburgh this year with it, and
Yes, come to Edinburgh.
it's called Unholier Than Thou.
Unholier Than Thou.
The non-believing religious studies teacher, and it's got a secular orientation. It's got anecdotes from my days as a RE teacher, religious studies teacher, beg your pardon. Some more kind of argument, polemic, I suppose is the word, and hopefully lots of jokes. And you know, it's not all that savage.
Well, some are more savage than others, aren't there?
Yeah.
There's Lewis Black, there's George Carlin, and there's more gentle ones too, isn't there? But the odd thing is, there are practically no religious comedians.
But they do exist.
There's one guy I saw who claimed to be a Christian comedian, but he wasn't funny.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I just got distracted by it. Some sort of familial dispute over there.
Yes, yes. We've got the dog walkers now.
Yeah, but they do exist. They do
Yeah.
exist. They part of what they do. You get a funny sort of thing. There's a few comics I know who've got a Christian faith, and it largely doesn't influence their stand-up, but they do church gigs, and I think they're then able to tell sort of church-going related stories.
Yeah, yeah.
I saw a Orthodox Jewish comedian on the net the other day who's British, and he's doing a show in Edinburgh
Yeah.
about being an Orthodox Jew. So they do exist. I suspect it's probably more likely that you and I wouldn't naturally orientate ourselves towards them.
Maybe we haven't looked at their material because we're seeking something else.
Well, there's an evangelical type in America I've seen, who's, that kind of more kind of blood and thunder type thing. And we
Fire and brimstone
Fire and
comedy.
brimstone. I mean, the thing is, it would be nice. I get some of my material, I suppose, is dark, but it's all because I assume because it's delivered in quite a, softer sort of way. Because we just don't really seem to do that sustained anger, do we?
No, no. Lewis Black, if you want
Yeah.
angry rant, he's great at that.
Yeah.
But it's not your style.
No, I'm wry, bit sardonic, bit acerbic, I suppose.
Yes.
But that's all in keeping with a sort of an English demeanour, I would imagine.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
probably is. Yes.
Yeah.
Self-deprecating,
Yeah.
modest, and come on, I can't big up the nation like that.
Well,
Kevin,
thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Thank you
Absolute
very much
pleasure, John.
indeed.
Yeah.